Morning, church. I got a few announcements that I want to share with you before we begin our worship service. But first and foremost, let me just say this, that some of you have been emailing me or you've asked me this question as we've crossed paths as I'm walking around the city. What's with the nativity set by your fireplace? Well, easy answer. I know it's May 3rd. I know Christmas is long gone, but I've got this granddaughter, her name is Hope, and she loves to play with baby Jesus, so we let the nativity set stay out. She has been playing with it. Early on, we decided to buy a nativity set that our kids could play with, so that explains that. I know it's been troubling many of you. Now that mystery is solved. Hey, I'm glad you're with us, and some things I'd love for you to be aware of. If you want to get information on what's happening at Salem Alliance, one of the best ways you can stay connected is through our digital bulletin. If you text SAC info to the number 21000 or 21,000, that'll get you logged in for our digital bulletin. It comes out every week. It's got the latest and the greatest updates about what's going on. We'd love for you to get that so you know what's happening at Salem Alliance. And if you're not getting the email that tells you about that and other things going on, such as the midweek update this past week, Brian Cadello provided some great information through our midweek update. Laura Scherer is doing the 3 pauses. If you're not getting that information, go to our website, salemalliance.org, and at the very bottom you'll see an area that says Stay Updated. You can fill that information in, and we'll keep you at the speed about all that's happening at Salem Alliance. Also on the website, you'll see Help My City. If you go to that page, you'll find lots of ways that you can be engaging in the real-time needs that are happening in our cities, and ways for you to lean in and pursue our vision of a city at peace with God. One I want to highlight for us is the UGM. UGM is looking for some hygiene kits, so things like toothpaste and toothbrushes and toiletry items. You'll see at the very bottom of that Help My City page those items listed out, and some times to drop them off at Broadway Coffee House or Better Than Mama's, which are both located at Broadway Commons. It's just a real need right now, so if you want to engage in that way, that's the information for you. And again, as you're giving, thank you so much for your generosity. You're giving to the Easter offering and to the ministry fund, which fuels our vision of a city at peace with God. Giving, it happens this way. You can do it online. Text to give numbers there on the screen for you, as well as an address if you want to mail something to Salem Alliance at 555 Gain Street. All that information is there. And thank you again, church, for your incredible generosity in this season. We're praying that a day comes so we can all be back together again. But in the meantime, I'm grateful we can connect in this way. So I'm going to toss it to Laura and to her son Travis as they lead us in worship today. Thanks, Laura and Travis, for leading us so well this week. And I just want to also let you know that after I'm done preaching, we're going to celebrate communion together. So you may want to get some of those communion elements ready, some bread, some juice or wine, as we worship and remember our Lord who suffered for us. Hey, the name Corrie ten Boom is a name that fewer and fewer people recognize, which is a bummer because the ten Boom family was used powerfully during World War II. They created a hiding place in their home and took in Jewish families and helped them get evacuated out of Holland. They actually saved the lives of 800 Jewish people. That all came crumbling down because a local Dutch man named Jan Vogel betrayed them, and the ten Boom family was arrested and immediately sent to death camps in Germany. And every single one of the ten Boom family died in those death camps except for Corrie. Corrie and Betsy were sent to Ravensbrück in Germany, and as soon as they got off that train in the concentration camp, they suffered incredible humiliation. They were stripped of their clothes. They were forced to walk naked in front of Nazi guards. They were beaten horrifically in that camp, deprived of food, and just basically treated like an animal. Betsy would die in Ravensbrück in December of 1944. And Corrie was destined with all the women in her barracks for the gas chamber, but there was a clerical error, and she was suddenly released from Ravensbrück about a week before the rest of the women in that barracks were gassed. Now, the Holocaust was horrible, and it's amazing that Corrie ten Boom survived it all. But what's more amazing was her response after the war, particularly her love for the German people. Corrie took a small old concentration camp and refurbished it and remodeled it and turned it into a rehab center for those who had been hurt and wounded from the war. And she also did some work and remodeled and refurbished them into these barracks into apartments and homes. And German families who were homeless were taken in by Corrie and others and cared for after the war. Corrie ten Boom went all through Europe and specifically all through Germany, preaching the gospel of grace and forgiveness found only in Jesus Christ. And she would tell her story of her forgiving the German people for the atrocities of World War II. In one of those moments when she's preaching in a church, it happened to be in Munich, the birthplace of Nazism. She's done preaching her message on forgiveness and the grace that's available through Jesus Christ. And as she finishes the sermon, she sees a man walking up towards her, and immediately she recognizes him. This was a guard at Ravensbrück. And I want to read to you a portion from Corrie ten Boom's writings where she captures this powerful moment. Corrie writes, "And that's when I saw him, working his way forward against the others. One moment I saw the overcoat and the brown hat, the next a blue uniform and a visored cap with its skull and crossbones. It came back with a rush. The huge room with its harsh overhead lights, the pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor. The shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment skin. Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man had been a guard at Ravensbrück concentration camp where we were sent. Now, he was in front of me, his hand thrust out. A fine message, Fraulein. How good it is to know that, as you say, all our sins are at the bottom of the sea." And I, who had spoken so glibly of forgiveness, fumbled in my purse rather than take that hand. He wouldn't remember me, of course. How could he remember one prisoner from among thousands of women? But I remembered him. I remembered the leather whip swinging from his belt. It was the first time since my release that I had been face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. "You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk," he was saying. "I was a guard in there." Oh, he didn't remember me. "But since that time," he went on, "I have become a Christian, and I know that God has forgiven me for the many very cruel things I did there. But I would like to hear it from your lips as well. Fraulein," and again the hand came out, "will you forgive me?" And I stood there, I whose sins had to be forgiven every day, and I couldn't forgive. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply by asking? It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, but to me it seemed like hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I ever had to do. For I had to do it. I knew it. The message that God forgives has a prior condition, that we forgive those who have injured us. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, Jesus says, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Jesus, help me, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder and raced down my arm and sprang into our joined hands. And then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, my brother, I cried, with all my heart. For a long moment, we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then. I don't know how that story strikes you. For me, I'm just awestruck at the power of forgiveness, the power of the gospel in this particular moment. And friends, nothing exalts Jesus, our suffering Christ, quite as much, in my estimation, nothing exalts our suffering Christ more than when those who claim to follow him suffer well as he did. In fact, suffering has a way of finding us, and when we suffer well, it actually brings such credibility to our faith and produces incredible growth in us. And frankly, that when suffering does find us, someone needs to see us suffering well. Now, I say suffering, and right away, at least for me, maybe it does for you, there's a sort of a defense mechanism that kicks in. You know, we want to keep suffering out here. I mean, in this COVID-19 season, we're reading that, yes, people are dying, but in many cases, it's people who have underlying health conditions. Those are the ones who are losing their lives. And so we often say, well, as long as I take care of myself, if I eat well and I exercise well and I'm getting rest and I'm mentally healthy, I'll be okay. I can keep suffering out here. And should suffering sort of get in, maybe there's a physical ailment that comes my way, I got a headache, I can take Tylenol. If I'm suffering from nighttime cold symptoms, I can take NyQuil. If I can't sleep, I can listen to a Candelo sermon. Sorry, Brian, couldn't help it. But we have this idea that we can, any kind of situation, we can sort of just kind of relieve ourselves. We can keep it at arm's length. I mean, if we elect the right person as president, or we elect the right leader, then suffering will be relieved and great leadership will take place in our country. Or if we get the right social programs in place, I mean, the suffering of poverty can be fixed. We have this idea that we can control suffering and we can keep it at arm's length. But here's the reality. Suffering, like an intruder or a burglar, can work its way past the security systems, the locked doors, the locked windows of our homes. And suffering has a way of finding its way into our lives. And then we're faced with it. And friends, for those of us who follow a Christ, a Lord who suffered so well, we too need to suffer and know how to suffer well. And as we do, credibility and beauty of our faith comes to life. And as it did in Corrie ten Boom's testimony, thousands were saved. Now, we're in this series we're calling House Arrest. We know we're not under literal house arrest, but we're looking at the lives of people who experienced things like exile or imprisonment. We looked at John on Patmos and talked about how this was an opportunity for him to position himself for an encounter with the presence of Jesus. Rob did a great job last week of talking about John the Baptist in prison and finding rest, yet experiencing rest brought doubts to his mind about who Jesus is. As he brought his doubts to Jesus, he experienced grace and he heard testimonies that only further rooted his faith in who Jesus is. And today, I want to talk to you about the fact and how suffering comes our way and how we might, as followers of a Christ who suffered well, be people who suffer well, and that we might authenticate our Christ as we walk into the pain of our lives. And I want to do this by looking at a person named Joseph. His story is found in the Old Testament, and it's found in Genesis chapter 37 through 50. I'm not going to read any of the story because it's a rather long story. I don't have time to read the whole story for us. I'm going to condense it quite significantly. I'd encourage you sometime this week, maybe later today, to read Genesis chapter 37 through 50. It's a fascinating story. And I want to point to Joseph because he suffers in at least three significant ways. Joseph is a favorite son of Jacob, the patriarch Jacob. And he's got a lot of brothers. His family is big. And Joseph is a favorite of his dad. He's got a special coat that his dad has given to him. And his brothers despise him. And one day, Joseph is walking to check on his brothers, to give a report to his dad. And his brothers see him, and they are filled with contempt, and they hatch a plan. Joseph comes near, and they grab him. They rip the coat off of this young boy. He's about 17 years old. They strip him of his coat, and they tie him up, and they throw him into a pit. Their plan is to murder him. They're going to shred that coat and make it look like an animal, wild animal attacked him. They're going to dip that coat in blood to make it look like he was killed by an animal, when in fact they were planning on murdering him. But some of them begin to have second thoughts. There's a camel caravan coming their way. There's Ishmaelite traders heading to Egypt, and they end up deciding to sell Joseph into slavery. They traffic him to Egypt. And this is where Joseph's first significant pain comes into the story. Here's the pain. Here's the suffering he endured. He suffers the pain of family betrayal and rejection. He suffers from family betrayal and rejection. Look, some of you know that pain. You know the reality, the deep wound of that pain. Now Joseph, he's headed to Egypt, and he gets put on the trading block in Egypt, and an official named Potiphar purchases him, brings him into his house, gives him responsibilities, and Joseph is a hard-working young man. He's got a work ethic. He shows responsibility. He's also a leader, and he's rising in the ranks of Potiphar's household. And so Potiphar notices him and gives him more responsibility. But it's not only Potiphar who notices him, Mrs. Potiphar notices him, and she's trying to seduce Joseph into compromising his character and having an affair with her, and he refuses. She tries multiple times. Joseph courageously resists that temptation. In fact, one day she grabs him, begging him to come to the bedroom with her, and he runs out of the room, leaving behind his coat that's in her hands. And later on, when Potiphar comes home from his work, she says that this Hebrew boy, this slave, attacked her. And here's the second way that Joseph suffers significantly. First way, family betrayal and rejection. Second way, he suffers from false accusation. Some of you know the pain that comes from being accused of something that you did not do. You know this pain. Well, there's no trial. Joseph is a slave, and immediately he's thrown into prison, and he's put in prison. But once again, his work ethic is strong, and he shows responsibility and leadership, and the prison guards are trusting him with jobs in the prison, and he's respected. Then 2 members of Pharaoh's staff are sent to prison, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And one night, they have a dream. And both of them can't figure out what their dreams mean. And so they're talking, and Joseph tells them that God can interpret the dream. He listens to the dream and tells the chief cupbearer that he will be restored to his position. Ends up telling the chief baker that actually he's going to be executed, and that indeed did happen. And as the chief cupbearer is going back to Pharaoh's palace, Joseph begs him to remember him and to plead his case. He's unjustly been put in prison, and the chief cupbearer promises to, but he goes to the palace and he doesn't tell Pharaoh about this Hebrew boy in prison. And this is the third point of suffering I want to highlight for us. First one, family betrayal and rejection. The second one, he suffers from false accusation. And the third one is Joseph suffers from being forgotten. Some of you know the pain of being overlooked, forgotten. Joseph is in prison, and he's still serving, and he's still leading, even though he's in a place of darkness. And then one day Pharaoh has a dream. These cows coming out of the Nile River, 7 really fat cows, and then 7 scrawny cows, and no one can interpret the dream. And that's when the chief cupbearer remembers that Joseph is in prison, and he interprets dreams. And Joseph is summoned from prison, brought into the palace. Joseph interprets the dream. You have 7 years of plenty coming, followed by 7 years of famine. And so what you need to do is put someone in charge of the plenty so that it can be saved for the famine. And Pharaoh sees the strategic leadership in this young Hebrew boy and makes him the vice president of Egypt. Now, if the story ended there, it'd be a great story. But the story doesn't end there, even though he's come from a pit and Potiphar's household and prison and into the palace. Now it gets better because Joseph, as he's leading in Egypt and the famine years do come, guess who comes to get food? His brothers. Oh, this is the moment, isn't it? This is the moment of payback. Oh, this is the moment when he could take revenge. But Joseph doesn't. He refuses to take revenge. He refuses payback. And kind of an extended reveal, so to speak, there comes this moment when Joseph reveals that to these men that he, in fact, is the one that they sold into slavery. He is their brother. And there is great fear among the brothers that their lives will be taken from them. But Joseph doesn't. And he says these powerful words that are recorded in the book of Genesis to his brothers. It's a moment. It's almost like a Corrie ten Boom, put my hand as a former prisoner into a former prisoner guard's hand. Words of grace spoken. Where Joseph says these words. He says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." What you intended for evil, yes, your motives were evil. Your motives were very wicked. You wanted to kill me, but you sold me as a slave instead, and that was horrible. But actually God used it for good, and it's resulting in the saving of many lives. But I want to make sure we understand something here. I don't think Joseph believed that when he was in the pit. When he was in the pit, before he got sold to those slave traders, I don't think he was thinking, oh, this is all going to work out for good. When he's in Potiphar's house and he's being falsely accused of attempted rape, I don't think he's saying, it's okay, you can send me to prison, this is all going to work out for good. No, I think he's pleading for his life. I think he's filled with anguish. When he gets to prison, I don't think he's in prison going, oh, this is going to be great, I can't wait to see how this unfolds. No, he wants out. He's suffering. And even when he's in the palace and he's the vice president of Egypt, I don't think he is saying at that moment that, okay, now I can see how God is all working out his plans. Friends, I don't think he sees any of that. I think he comes to that realization in that moment when his brothers are standing before him. He sees the picture come, it's fully developed, like a Polaroid photo that's taken time to emerge. This picture emerges and he sees this is what God was doing. And because Joseph suffers well, he maintains his integrity. He doesn't retaliate. Because he suffers well, indeed the lives of many, even his family, are spared. Friends, Joseph suffers well, and many lives are saved. And when suffering finds its way into our lives, even though we may try and keep it at a distance, when suffering finds its way into our lives, as those who follow a Christ who suffered so well on our behalf, someone needs to see you, me, us suffer well. How does that happen? Well, in these last moments with you, before we celebrate communion together, the moment when our Christ did suffer well for us, I just want to highlight some ways that we can ready ourselves to suffer well. Maybe you find yourself in pain today. Maybe life is going great. That's fantastic. I hope it goes great for as long as possible. But suffering sometimes finds us, so whether you're there or whether you're not there, or you just come out the backside of it, here's 4 just simple ways that you and I could suffer well. First one is this: don't be surprised by suffering. Now, one of Jesus' best friends was Peter, and Peter was surprised by suffering. And he learned by that. And in his epistle, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12, Peter writes these words. He says, "Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." Don't be surprised. Think of it this way. You're traveling and you're going to go do business. You're going to live somewhere internationally. And you know that as you go to this other nation, that the customs there are different. The food is different there. You know there's going to be such thing called culture shock. So you prepare yourself. You go, you engage, and maybe you spend quite a bit of time there. You live there a lot of years in this foreign country, but then you come home and you experience something you weren't expecting. It's called reverse culture shock. And you find that you're agitated by the customs of your homeland. In fact, you might even feel anger as you're trying to re-enter this place that you were born. You weren't expecting it. And friends, one of the ways that we could suffer well is not to be surprised by it. And if we are, what will happen is you might experience some agitation. There might be some anger that might arise. And one of the ways that you can just lean in and suffer well is simply by not being surprised when suffering comes your way. The second way that you and I can suffer well is to learn how to lament your suffering. Lament is an interesting concept. In fact, the highest percentage of the Psalms, the prayer book of the Old Testament, the highest percentage of those Psalms are called lament Psalms. It's similar to this idea of complaint. They're different, because the children of Israel, they were thought poorly of for their complaining and grumbling against God in the wilderness. They were led out of Egypt. The blood of the Passover lamb saved their lives by that last plague. The Red Sea parts for them. They go into the wilderness. They're led by a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. But there comes a point where they have no water. They've got no meat. They have very little shelter. And they turn on God. And what they do is they come to this conclusion. They say to God, "You're trying to kill us. You're attempting to kill us, God." They actually make God the villain. Well, that's the complaining and grumbling that we're warned against. Lament is different, however. Lament is trying to find some resolution to our pain and suffering in this world, yet at the same time going to God, not because He's being pictured by us as the villain, but we're going to Him because we know His character. We know He's a God of justice. We know He's a God of loving kindness. And so we process our pain with Him. We cast ourselves on His character. So, for example, because some of you need to write a lament psalm. Some of you are in pain right now. But if Joseph were to write a lament psalm, it would sound something like this. It's broken into three kind of steps. The first one is, "God, I feel." And we just pour out our feeling. And then we say, "But God, you are," which is the second part of the lament psalm. And then finally, there's an action point, "So I will." So if Joseph were to write a lament psalm, he'd say something like this: "God, I feel completely rejected, betrayed by my family. I'm so angry. I pleaded for mercy and it wasn't given to me. And God, when I was in Potiphar's household, I worked hard. I maintained my character. I didn't compromise. And yet I got thrown in prison. Where were you, God? And I was in prison and then I was forgotten there and I cried out to you and I didn't hear any response from you. God, I just feel rejected. I feel forgotten. I feel so falsely accused." But then Joseph could shift to the second step of a lament psalm. "But God, you're a God of justice. You're a God who sees everything. Nothing misses your attention. You're a God of mercy. You're a God of loving kindness." And then we shift to the third part of the psalm. "So I will." So God, I'm going to keep coming to you and I'm going to keep throwing my concerns, my pain, and I come to you as a God who executes justice. I'm going to come to you, a God who is merciful and compassionate, and I can't wait for you to move on my behalf. That's a lament psalm. One of the ways to distinguish complaint and lament is just to carefully define the terms again. Let me just read it for us. It's simply this: a complaint is an accusation against God that maligns His character, but a lament is an appeal to God based on confidence in His character. God, I feel, but you are, so I will. So friends, if we're going to suffer well, let's not be surprised by suffering. It will find its way to us. And when it comes, let's enter into our pain, our suffering, and lament. And not paint God as the villain, but paint God as the one whose character is one we can go to and trust and rely on in our pain. Third one is simply this, and frankly, you're just not going to like this point. This is the point oftentimes that people go to first, and I think that's a mistake. That's why I've kind of put it at third. It's this get perspective. Here's what I mean. You see, you and I, when we experience suffering, this is when the deepest growth happens in our life. This is when the roots of our spiritual life go deep into Christ, if we will let it happen. This is why James will write in James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, these words that maybe cause us to recoil because we haven't lamented yet. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." This is what Paul says to the Roman church. "We also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope, and hope does not put us to shame." Friends, we have to get perspective. When suffering comes, we want nothing to do with it. But in reality, if we have the right perspective, this is where God does his deepest work in us. One person has said this: if God gives you an abundant harvest of trials, it is a sign of great holiness which he desires you to attain. Do you want to become a great saint? Ask God to send you many sufferings. The flame of divine love never rises higher than when fed with the wood of the cross, which the infinite love of the Savior used to finish his sacrifice. All the pleasures of the world are nothing compared with the sweetness found in the gall and vinegar offered to Jesus Christ. Friends, if we're going to learn how to suffer well, as we follow our Christ who suffered so well for us, remember that someone needs to see you suffer well, because it's powerful. So we shouldn't be surprised by it. We shouldn't ignore it. We should lament our suffering and learn how to do this. Get perspective that this could be some of the deep work we've been praying that God would do in our lives. And fourthly and lastly, I would say this: long for heaven. Long for heaven. Friends, there will come a day when all suffering and pain will be done away with. There will come a day when every wrong will be made right. Every injustice will be dealt with. And longing for heaven doesn't eliminate the pain, but in some ways it is a great pain reliever. And again, if I could read one more quote for us, it's simply this, is that if we were more familiar with heaven and less familiar with earth, our suffering perhaps wouldn't take on so great a pain. So as we learn how to suffer well, don't be surprised by it. Lament. Learn how to lament. Get perspective. Long for heaven. And let's remember that our Christ was sent to us, and he suffered well. Oh, he lamented on the cross. He cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But he knew his Father wasn't the villain. He expressed his pain. And the writer of Hebrews tells us that for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Now, as we just prepare our own hearts for continued worship, we think about communion, we think about a Christ who did suffer so well for us. And friends, as we celebrate him, may his example be to us that someone needs to see us suffer as well. And as we do, Jesus is lifted up and exalted. And friends, this perhaps is what our world needs to see to be convinced of who Jesus is in us. Let's pray. So Lord, as we now shift our attention from what your word says to us to your work on the cross, may awe and wonder rise in us as we remember a Christ who suffered so well and saved so many. Amen. I'm grateful that you were worshiping with us today, and I hope as we remembered our Christ that your worship just flowed freely to a Christ who suffered so well for you. If you find yourself in a situation where you just love someone to pray with you, you can go to our website, salemalliance.org. If you scroll down on that page, you'll see a prayer support tab. You can click on that and tell us how we could pray for you. We have people who've readied themselves to call you and pray with you as well, so that option's available. And if you've never begun a friendship with God, with Jesus, that option is available as well. You can go to, you can let us know by emailing us at thecross@salemalliance.org. We would love to just celebrate with you and help you take your next steps in following after Jesus. So if that's a step for you, we'd be so happy to help you begin that new relationship with Jesus. And as you go today into this next week, I want to bless you with these words. I bless you with courage to enter into your suffering. Like John on Patmos, may your suffering lead you into astonishing encounters with the presence of Jesus. Like John the Baptist, may your trials deepen your belief in Jesus as Lord. Like Joseph, may your response to pain open your eyes to the goodness of God. May Holy Spirit empower you, strengthen you, and embolden you to suffer well as you follow Christ who suffered so well for you. Grace and peace to you. Have a great day.